Now, once again, Raymond Arroyo.
Welcome back to The World Over Live. Roman pontiffs have met with Orthodox Church leaders throughout history, but this marks the first time that a pope meets with the Russian Orthodox Patriarch since the Great Schism of 1054. Joining us to discuss the significance of this meeting and what could come from it is George WEIGEL, author of The Roman Pilgrimage, The Station Churches, and archpriest of the American Orthodox Church, Father YAROSLAV SUDICK. Thank you both for being here.
Thank you, Raymond.
Did you have a correction for me?
Well, in 1054, the Russian Orthodox Patriarchate of Moscow didn't exist.
Right.
So I think that's not the reference point.
Okay.
The reference point is this is the first time in some 500 years that these two leaders have met, and that's something of considerable significance. But as you said in your lead-in, popes have been meeting with leaders of Orthodoxy for 50-some years now, since Paul VI first met Patriarch Athenagoras in Jerusalem in 64. What's good about this is that the Patriarchate of Moscow has finally agreed to meet with the Pope.
Father Sudik, how important is this moment from your perspective?
I think it's
in
a very
Orthodoxy?
important time because this is the first time that the Russian Church has finally decided that we are living in the 2016 and we're moving into the right direction, because it is time that the churches start to talk about unification. As I said before, the enemy is not between the Orthodox and the Roman Church, and that is the enemy outside the churches that are coming at us. And when you look at the problems that the Eastern Christians are faced in the Middle East, that is the big problem. And someone has to speak for the poor people. And the only candidate that's running for president that I hear is Donald Trump telling us about how they're killing the Christians. I don't hear anything about, from our government, saying anything. They kind of pass it by. And these poor people are being slaughtered, and this is the problem that we have to immediately address this.
Well, the president did mention it in his Good Friday message. He did have a passing reference to the Christian slaughter there. Let's talk for a moment about these two men.
Sure.
Patriarch Kirill, in his background, he was in charge of the external outreach, the ecumenical wing of the Russian Orthodox Church. Is there anything that particularly predisposes him to this sort of meeting? And what about Pope Francis?
Raymond, I think the first thing to be said about Patriarch Kirill is that he's a very able man. I've met him twice at dinners here in Washington when he was the external relations officer for the Russian Orthodox Church. By the same token, it's important to recognize there's a real asymmetry here. The Pope comes to this as an independent operator. He's his own man. He comes with if you will, a pure heart. Unfortunately, the Patriarchate of Moscow is so deeply entwined with the Russian government that it's not at all clear that Patriarch Kirill comes to this meeting as an independent operator. We have to hope that in their private conversations, he will indeed speak as the leader of a church. But there should be no confusion about the fact that he is doing this in part because President Putin of Russia wants him to do it.
No, they're very aligned, and the Russian Orthodox Church has been very aligned with the government, the Soviet government, and now the Kremlin today. Yes, Father?
Yes, but remember, the government underneath the Soviet time, that was just that period of time. But also, the church suffered underneath the Soviet period of time. 45,000 clerics were killed, and all the churches were destroyed. But the government then came back now and gave the church $100 million to restore all these buildings that they destroyed, and they gave us ashes back. And I was involved in the 1990s raising money for the orphans. And I had a big concert in New York City at on Park Avenue, St. Ignatius de Loyola, and we did Rachmaninoff's Divine Liturgy, and we raised money for the orphans. And we took $50,000 to the orphanages in Russia because they were so poor.
George, I want to move on to the background of Pope Francis. Some of the press accounts say, look, this is the perfect pope for this. He doesn't come with all the baggage that John Paul II had, an instinctive suspicion for the Soviets. Is that a true appraisal of what's happening here?
No. I mean, John Paul II tried on numerous occasions to in a sense, invite himself to come to
Yeah.
Russia, virtually begged to be allowed to come in.
Handing over relics and
John Paul II had a deep, deep regard for the spiritual riches of Russian Orthodoxy. I think his own philosophical and theological thinking was influenced by the Russian Orthodox thinker Vladimir Soloviev. So it's simply Kremlin propaganda to say that he was some fierce anti-Soviet bigot who had no use for Russian Orthodoxy or Russia. That's just simply not true. I think the reason he was not let in is twofold. One, it was payback for his role in the collapse of European communism, and by extension the Soviet Union, which we remember Mr. Putin said was the greatest geopolitical disaster of the 20th century. And there was the question of the church, of the Pope's support for the Ukrainian Greek Catholic Church, which remains unnecessarily, in my view, a bone of contention between Rome and Moscow.
Is this a stumbling block, Father Sudik?
No.
The Ukrainian Greek Catholic
Well, they call it
Church.
the Ukrainian Catholic Church.
Right.
I was a trustee at St. Basil's Ukrainian Catholic High College at Stamford, Connecticut, with Basil Austin, and I helped them with their accreditation. And you see, you have to understand that in this country we have a different perspective about the Ukrainian Catholic Church, the Greek Catholic Church. We work together. We're all friends because this is America. But in Europe, this is a contention. There is
And in Ukraine itself.
Yeah, and in Ukraine. And I'll just tell you one story. I was in the Ukrainian Catholic Church. I was invited by Bishop Basil Austin and to be there. And we're speaking there, and they brought in a priest from the Ukraine. And he starts talking against the Orthodox. And I'm sitting there. He didn't know. Bishop Basil Austin stood up and said, in this country, we don't do that. We don't air our family problems in the public.
Raymond, one of the most striking and I think hopeful things about the situation in Ukraine since the Maidan revolution of dignity in 2013, 2014, has been that the Ukrainian Catholic Church has worked so closely with the four contending Orthodox jurisdictions, the four contending Orthodox churches in Ukraine, to build a civil society that honors the dignity of the human person, that deals with these fantastic problems of corruption that are preventing the political and economic development of Ukraine. And I hope the Pope reminds Patriarch Kirill of that tomorrow, that we have been cooperative. The Greek Catholic Church in Ukraine has been cooperating quite well with Orthodox jurisdictions in Ukraine, and it's simply propaganda from Moscow, as Father indicates, to suggest otherwise.
I want to talk about some of the geopolitical implications. Some are saying this is an important moment for President Putin to create an ally in the West to support him both in Syria as well as Russia's ambitions in Ukraine. Is that part of the thinking behind this meeting?
I hope not, but who knows? You know, but I hope not, because it would be a disaster if that was the thinking. I think that if the Patriarch and his meeting with the Pope with the spiritual idea and the love of Jesus Christ, and to work for unification and love, this will be very productive. But if it's to manipulate some kind of a political entity, it will be a disaster.
George Weigel, what could be the implication for Kirill himself, who is contending with the other branches of Orthodoxy for prominence, and the implication seems to be Bartholomew is spent, the ecumenical patriarch, and that Russia should be the second Rome?
Or the third Rome, as it likes to call itself. Let me comment on Syria and Ukraine first. I think President Putin is feeling isolated in the world. I think Russia is feeling isolated in the world. One motivation behind this meeting is to end that isolation via this relationship between Kirill and Pope Francis. If that should, in fact, move Russia to a less aggressive stance, in Ukraine, for example, that's all to the good. Kirill has his own concerns, as you indicate. He has been throwing a few elbows around in terms of asserting himself over the ecumenical patriarch of Constantinople, who is traditionally first among equals in the Orthodox world. As Orthodoxy prepares for this unprecedented pan-Orthodox synod in Crete this coming June. So he's trying to ratchet up his stature, and that's part of what's going on as well. Now, Pope Francis has got a real challenge here, because Bartholomew, the ecumenical patriarch, has been enormously forthcoming in his relationships with the Catholic Church, and indeed took his doctoral degree at the Gregorian University in Rome. So it would be very bad if somehow this would be perceived as the Vatican tossing Constantinople over the side for the sake of a Muscovite church that has, unfortunately, very little traction in its own country, about 2% mass attendance on Sunday in the major cities, and that is deeply divided in Ukraine right now. If Francis can somehow help heal those wounds within the Orthodox world, that would be a real step forward for the unification desire that Father mentioned.
Father Sudick, I'm going to start with you, and George, I'm going to give you 30 seconds. What will come out of this meeting in your estimation, substantively? They're signing this joint declaration of opposing Christian persecution, decrying the secularity in Europe. What really comes of this meeting?
I think from the perspective that will come out of this, when you look at these both men meeting together, that this is the first time that this has happened, and that we have hope that this will bring change within our church and the way we think and in the world. And this will show that the enemies of Christendom have a big enemy, that we are coming, we are united. And then Bethlehem and Jerusalem, don't have to worry, we're going to come and protect you.
George Weigel.
The fact that this is happening should mean that there can't be any backsliding in the future. In other words, there can be no more excuses from Moscow, we can't meet with you guys because of this, that, or the other thing. All right, we met on your turf in Cuba. There can't be any backsliding from that. So let's hope it moves forward. Secondly, anything that raises up the drastic condition of persecuted Christian communities in the Middle East, gets that on the world agenda, is a useful thing. That has to be disentangled from everybody's political games in that reason, but the fact of lifting up daily martyrdom is no bad thing.
Very good. George Weigel, Father Sudick, thank you both for being here.